So with your stick and stitch, when you get your kit, what you want to do is cut out your design, and we left the 7-inch hoop circle on there as a guide for you. So you could, if you wanted to, cut out really close to the pumpkin all the way around, or you can just cut out using the guide circle. So that's what I've done. And actually, to keep your fabric nice and clean underneath, it's quite good to cut more, you know, leave a generous margin all the way around. And then what you're going to do is, and sometimes this comes away quite easily and sometimes it's a bit of a faff, you're just going to peel away the top layer. Excuse my nails, they're needing to be redone. So you're just literally peeling off the top. You might find that some of the pattern is transferred onto the paper underneath. That's okay, because you're going to discard that. And then if you've got any creases, so if your stick and stitch has arrived folded, which it probably has, it doesn't matter, because when you, I told you it would be a bit chaotic, when you stick it onto your fabric, you're literally going to lay it on and smooth it down. So you don't want any kind of bubbles or creases in the fabric underneath, and ideally iron that first, because I've got a little crease in there. So I'm going to lift this off in a second anyway. But just stick it on really firmly, press it down all the way around, and then your stick and stitch will actually protect the fabric underneath and stop it from getting dirty as you're working. So sometimes, you know, there's quite a lot of stitching in this, so it might take you a little while to complete it. So it's a good thing to keep it nice and clean. What I'm going to do now, so that's as far as we've got with the stick and stitch and how to apply it to the fabric. In case you're wondering as well, there's all sorts of different clamps and hoops and frames and what have you for stitching your embroidery to help you not have to use a hand, you know, to hold the hoop as you're stitching. And this one is a really good one. I would show you the whole thing, but I don't want to take my phone off there again. But it's just clamped onto the desk, and yeah, it's all wood. It's quite nice, and I got it from Amazon. Don't tell anyone. But yeah, this one came from Amazon. We do sell others on our own website that you sit on. So the seat frame, it goes under your bottom and then you can stitch. It tends to wobble about a little bit, so I quite like this one here. There's your fabric with your stick and stitch. Now in your pack you get 12 different colours, different shades of embroidery thread. If you're making everything symmetrical and you've used one of these colours, just try and remember to do the other side straight away so that you're not mixing the colours up. And also, by the way, you can take these on a plane. The blades are less than 6 centimetres long, so they are allowed. And then also, you'll need your needle, of course. Now in your kit, you'll have hints and tips, which really just gives you some ideas of where you can use the various stitches. You don't need to stick to this though. You can, apart from things like the woven roses and the lazy daisies probably, you can use other stitches to fill the design. You don't need to follow this exactly. Some hints and tips on the back, but you also get your booklet, which has got all of your stitch designs. The only one that's not in here that you will need is the woven rose, so I'm definitely going to cover that tonight. Don't forget as well that you can go onto YouTube, where I've recorded a series of short videos. They are very short actually, but the reason why they're so short is because I recorded them for TikTok, and I will get around to recording some more detailed or longer videos for you for the stitches. And I'm just going to point out some of the stitches that we've used. I'm just making sure that I can actually get this kind of in the frame. It's a wee bit off centre, isn't it? Okay, so what we've got here is we've got an outline which I've done in split stitch, but you could also use chain stitch or a back stitch for the outline. You don't need to use a split stitch. There's quite a lot of lazy daisy stitches, so the flowers and these sort of leaves here are lazy daisies. You've got your woven roses, which are much easier than they look. There's quite a lot of French knots going on, so you've got the whole of these flower centres are French knots. This tendril up the top here, that's stem stitch. You've got satin stitch, leaf stitch, which is nice, obviously for leaves, and these satin stitch on the petals here as well. So a variety of stitches. There's none of these stitches are really complicated, so this kit, although it looks quite complex and there is quite a bit of stitching in it, it's really good for beginners. And before I pop this down, I also want to show you that you can mix your threads. So on these acorn leaves here, and also on the flower centres at the side here, so this one at the side, and of course it's symmetrical, so it's on the other side as well. What I've done is I've used on this one 2 strands of yellow and 1 strand of one of the oranges, and just to give them a little bit more texture, so you can mix up the thread colours. Okay, let's get started with a few stitches. So what I will do is just bear with me while I have to unscrew this. So we'll take this out. And if you've never embroidered before, you're going to put the complete hoop behind your work and the hoop with the screw on the top, and then tighten up the screw at the top and just pull your fabric evenly all the way around so it's nice and tight. Now, depending on the fabric that you're using, just be careful that you're not, I'm just going to lean this against me while I do this, just be careful that you're not really stretching it on one side more than the other, because it will, it'll stretch your fabric more than one side, you know, more on one side than the other. So you want to be tightening it and pulling your fabric through kind of evenly all the way around, but you do want it to be nice and tight, like a drum. Now you may find that you need to retighten as you're stitching, and that's quite normal. So once we've got our work in the hoop, we can pop it back in here. And that tightens up at the side there. You can't see that, but it's just a clamp. What I'll do is, and if I forget, please somebody remind me, but I will put the link to this clamp in the chat. Okay, let's move that. Okay, so we'll work on this side. Right, we are going to start off with some split stitch, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do a lot of stitching, and as I say, I can't really go in any closer because the camera and everything's going to go, well, let me have a little look and see. Might be able to go in a wee bit closer. Now you see the only problem is that it then casts a shadow, which is not ideal. And it's a bit blurred. Might be alright. It's a bit blurred, isn't it? I'm going to come back out again. Just do what I suggested, and when you watch this back, zoom in. That's the best thing to do. Okay, so we're going to get started, and I'm just going to use one of the oranges. I've got a piece that I can just take from the heap. Now it's best to work with lengths of thread that aren't too long, so you know there's obviously more chance of it getting knotted and tangled if your threads are too long. So sort of from, you know, the tips of your fingers to your elbow is a good length of thread to work with. And what we're going to do for split stitch is we want an even number of threads because we're going to be splitting the stitch, so an even number of threads is good. So I've got, I'm taking 2 threads and just pulling this apart so that I'm left with 4 strands of thread. And I'm going to start with a double knot. There are other ways of securing your work at the back. I usually just opt for a knot, and that works for me. Okay. I don't know if you can hear a cat outside. That's Twiggy trying to get in. So let's thread the needle. There we go. Now with a split stitch, there's a couple. Oh, hi Tanya, don't worry about being late. Remember, you can watch this back afterwards. So no problem at all. Okay, with a split stitch, there are a couple of different ways you can do it, and what you need to know about me is that I am not an expert embroiderer. So I'm not somebody who's been embroidering for years, and I definitely would not call myself an expert in any shape or form. You know, I've been learning in order to teach you. So I certainly don't profess to know everything about embroidery, but what I do know is that you can be creative with the way that you make the stitches, and I don't believe that there's, you know, there are right and wrong ways, but there are also other ways, if you like, if that makes sense. So if you find a way that works for you, then go with it and don't worry about what the books say. If it works for you and it doesn't, you know, use up 5 times as much thread, or, you know, if there's any other issues, then just go for it. So I found my preferred method of working a split stitch, and that is to come up. So I'm just going to start here. You could start anywhere around the edge of the pumpkin, so I'm just going to start here, bring the thread through, and then I'm going to come back down a stitch length along the line, and then I'm going to bring my needle up a stitch length along, and then I'm going to split the previous stitch by going back down into it. So it's a little bit like a back stitch in that you're working forward and backwards. So the reason why I like doing it this way, so again I'm going 1 stitch length along, and then I'm going back and splitting the previous stitch down the middle. I like doing it this way because you can see exactly where to put your needle to split the stitch. Whereas if you do it the other way, where you're coming up, so I'll just demonstrate that, you're coming up, you're kind of having to fiddle around and hope that you get lucky by coming up in the middle of the stitch. So come along, and then you're going back and splitting the previous stitch. So whichever way works for you. I just happen to prefer coming up a stitch length in front and going back so that I can see exactly where I'm going back down with the needle. Do one more. So up, stitch length in front, and then back down. And that was how I started. So I stitched all of the lines first of all. Once you get into a rhythm with you know, any kind of stitch, you kind of don't want to stop. So I really enjoy just creating that outline first of all with a split stitch. You could use chain stitch, as I say, or you could use back stitch. So what we will do is we will go, I'm just wondering whether to change my thread and do a different colour. Yeah, I'm just going to cut this, because the next thing we're going to do is a woven rose. And this is one that you're definitely going to have to, but just, you know, take note of, because the instructions for the woven rose are not in the little booklet. There is a video on YouTube, but there isn't a diagram in that booklet yet. There will be one when we get it reprinted. So if you're wondering why my thread ends up in such a mess, it's because I get really frustrated when you start pulling the thread out and it just all gets stuck, and I end up taking the little paper slips off, and yeah, it just all gets tangled. I end up having a tantrum. So now with your woven roses, you can use any thickness of thread you like, any number of strands. If you use all 6 strands, your rose is going to form more quickly. That's all I can really say about that. If you use fewer strands, or you could mix the colours again, that would be nice. Use fewer strands, it will just take you longer to form the rose. So it's up to you. I'm using all 6 strands, and I'm just tying a knot in the back. And I have used quite a lot of thread for this. I've taken a long length of thread, just because I don't want to have to be changing thread before I'm actually finished. Okay. Oh, Richard, I'm so glad. So that's what I mean, the split stitches. Hallelujah. Yeah, I just think, you know, whatever way works for you. And I tried it by the book, as it were, and I just thought, this is just really irritating, you know, and why do I need to do it this way? And I tried it the other way, and it's like, that works so much better. So yeah, you just do it whichever way works for you. Right, we are going to turn this little wheel into a woven rose. Now there's 2 different types of woven rose on the pattern. You've got one up here which doesn't have a centre, it's just got the 5 spokes going right into the middle, and then you've got this one here which has a centre. So what you could do with the centre of this is you could fill it with French knots, and you could do the French knots first and then do the petals, if you like, afterwards. I'm just going to go ahead and, now I wonder if, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and do the rose part of it and leave the centre just now. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to excuse me, we're going to create the spokes. So I've just started at the top of one and go back down to the middle. If you're using 6 strands of thread, you know, they'll just be a little bit trickier to pull through the fabric. There's the second one. Now ideally each of your spokes will be the same length, and I can see already that mine aren't, but what I'll do is I probably won't complete the whole rose, so it won't matter. But when you are stitching yours and you create these spokes, just try and get each one the same length. Now remember, this dissolves in water, so if you've got some of the pattern still showing after you've stitched, don't worry about it, because it's all going to disappear. So any of the pattern that is left showing will just disappear magically when you soak your work in water. If your thread gets twisted as you're stitching, best thing to do is just to let your needle drop, and it'll spin round and untwist itself. There's our 5 spokes, and we're going to come up near the centre, just to the right. Now, I'm saying right because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you might want to create your rows by going round in the other direction. But again, either way is fine. There's no right or wrong way. I'm going to just bring the needle up just to the right of one of the spokes. And this happens sometimes. I've brought through the tail from the other side. I'm going to have to just see if I can get rid of that. Interesting. Oh well. Well, that'll hopefully. If I wasn't filming, I would just turn this over and get rid of those 2 tails by pulling them through. But I can't get my head underneath. Never mind. We've come up to the right, and what we're going to do, it is literally weaving. So you're going to take your needle under one spoke, and over the next one. So then it's going to come under the next, and over the next one, and then under, and then over, and just, you know, sense check every now and then that you haven't gone wrong somewhere and that you're going under and under the same one. So each time you should be either going under or over, alternating as you go around. So that was an under, next one's over, so this is going to be under. The woven rows, because you're not actually stitching and you're just weaving, it is sometimes easier to turn your work around. So you might want to take it out of the clamp to do this. So that was an under, so that's over, so this is under, over, under. They're so satisfying. Over, under. Trying to keep my hands out of the way. Under. Just caught a little bit of the fibres of the stick and stitch there. So that's under, over, under. Apologies, muttering away here, just so that I don't miss. So that's under, over, under, over. And you're literally going to keep going. So that is under, over, under. Keep going until you cannot fit any more thread. Under, over. You can't, you know, until it gets a bit tricky to get your needle through. Under. There we go. I'll just do one more. And so on. And I can still see, definitely still see some of the stick and stitch design, but I can still see a little bit of the spokes sticking out, you know, the thread spokes. So I would probably continue and do another 2 or 3 rounds there, and then I would fill this centre in with some French knots. And that's how to do a woven rose. And if you are going to be doing some of your own little embroidery designs, then you know, you can look at what I've created on here and just use these ideas. So your woven rose, as I say, it's either just your spokes with no centre, or spokes with a circle in the middle that you can then fill with a satin stitch or French knots, or however you want to do that. You can make your woven roses as big or as small as you like, and the only thing that you need to remember is they need an odd number of spokes. It won't work with an even number because you will always end up at the same place going under, you know, it just doesn't work. You need an odd number. So once you've completed all of the rounds of weaving, you would just take your needle through to the back of the work and finish off as usual. And the way that I finish off at the back, I wonder if I can just show you this. Oh, a quick inspection to see how untidy it is. It's actually not too bad. There's the back of the pumpkin, and the way that I finish off is I just take my needle under a few stitches and then trim with a pair of scissors, trim quite closely. Just make sure you weave it in to, you know, several stitches, so there's no danger of it coming loose, and then trim. So let me just, obviously I'm not finishing this off properly, I'm just going to snip that at the back. Okay. Right, let's move on to do some French knots. Now you either love them or you loathe them, and it's all in the technique and a bit of practice as well. So I was working with 6 strands, and I'm now going to split the thread, and I'm just going to work with 3 strands for the French knots. So the fewer strands you work with, the finer the little knot, and if you're filling a space and you've got very fine knots, then you're just going to need to make a lot more of them. It's easier to make a neater little knot if you use fewer strands of thread. If you use all 6 strands, it can be quite difficult to get the thread back down through the fabric. So I'm going to tie a double knot. Always best to tie a double knot if you're using the knot technique, just so that it doesn't pop through from the back of the fabric. And I'm looking at this flower down here at the bottom, and the whole of the centre of that flower is filled with French knots. And I do enjoy making them, but I didn't always enjoy it. Because I wasn't doing it properly. Now I did, when I say that, you know, I'm just learning embroidery in order to teach you. Sorry, I'm just fiddling about with this, trying to get my needle threaded. That's not to say that I had never done embroidery. I did embroidery as a child. But not really since. And I think there's quite a lot of people like me out there who, you know, did sewing and embroidery when you were little, or you were at school and haven't picked it up since. So now's your chance. So I'm just looking at the question Cheryl's asking. I'm wondering if it would be easier to do the French knots first. Yes, I would. So the reason why I didn't was, well, I don't know. I just wanted to get one and show you a woven rose. But absolutely, you can do your French knots first and then do your rows around the knots. That's exactly what I would do on that one there. Because actually, you know, it's filled in quite a lot of the space and it's not going to be easy to get those knots in there. So on that one, do your French knots first and then do your petals around the edge. So we're going to do some French knots in this little space here, and I have just kind of signified them with these little dots. Now you're definitely not going to try and get one French knot on every dot. That's not possible, but it's just to show you this is where you can put some French knots. You could of course use a satin stitch here and just fill the space that way, but looks nice with the French knots. So you can start anywhere you like. You could start in the middle and work your way out. You could go random, or you could start at the edge, and I quite like to start at the edge, work my way around, and then kind of work inwards if you like. It doesn't need to look even at all. So you're just going to bring your needle up where you want your first knot to be. And bear in mind, I am right-handed, so if you're left-handed, you might want to reverse these instructions. So I'm going to hold the thread taut with my left hand, and I'm going to wrap the thread twice around my needle. I'm going to put my needle back down right next to where it's come up, and then holding the thread taut still with my left hand, and it's all in the tension, hold that thread taut and then pull the thread through. So I'm going to do a few more and then I'm going to show you what happens when you don't hold the thread taut, but I'll leave that one till last because it usually just makes a horrible mess. So we're going to do another one right next to it. So we're going to bring the needle up. I'm going to hold the thread taut to the left, wrap the thread twice around the needle, put the needle back down right next to where it's come out of the fabric, and then holding the thread taut, pull all the way through. And let's do one more the correct way, if you like. Needle up, hold the thread taut, wrap the needle twice around, needle back down right next to where it's come out of the fabric, and then holding the thread taut, pull all the way through. And you've got 3 quite neat little French knots there. Now you could wrap your thread around the needle just once and you get a smaller knot. You could wrap it around 3 times and you would get a bigger knot, so it's up to you. Let's see what happens when you don't hold the thread taut. So bring your needle up, wrap the thread twice around the needle, put the needle back down, and I'm just not going to hold onto the thread at all, and you can see what's happened there. And it's, once it does that, there's not really any rescuing it because it's tied a knot around itself, so you just end up with this big kind of loopy mess. So once again, the right way to do it: bring the needle up, hold the thread taut, wrap twice around the needle, needle back down and still holding that thread taut on the left hand side, pull the needle through and the thread will follow. There we go. So I made a bit of a mess there with that one odd one, but that was just to show you how important it is. And once you get into your rhythm of making French knots, I promise you will love them. So let's snip that and let's go for a different colour. So I love this green, this bright green. I always end up just pulling the wrong end of the thread and then it gets stuck and then I lose my temper and I take those paper slips off. I need to get some thread cards and wind all of that thread up so I don't waste it. Okay. Some lovely bright green thread here, and we're going to do the Lazy Daisy stitch with this. And this time I'm just going to work with 2 strands of thread. So separate, find 2 strands and just carefully, and again there are different methods of separating the strands of thread. This is just the one that I prefer to use, just literally pulling the threads apart. Just go slowly, and if it gets in a bit of a tangle, then just let it kind of drop and it'll untangle itself. A couple of knots. So Caroline's asking, my French knots tend to completely disappear. So what you might be doing, Caroline, is you might be putting your needle back down into the same hole that you came out of. So when you bring your needle out of the fabric, hold the thread taut, wrap twice or 3 times around the needle, but then when you put the needle back down into the fabric, make sure it's not going into the same hole. Because if it's going into the same hole and you've made you know, a big hole, depends what size of needle you're using, and then you pull it from the other side, you're probably just pulling the knot all the way through the fabric. Whereas if you go in just next to the knot, you're placing the knot onto the fabric rather than pulling it through. So I think that might be what's happening there. You'll need to try that. Try it out and tell me if that's what you think you've been doing. The other thing, of course, is that if you put your needle back down into exactly the same hole that you've come out of, you may end up putting your needle back down through some thread on the other side, and then it gets in a real tangle, and it gets, you know, it's really difficult to pull your needle through. Now there's quite a lot of areas of Lazy Daisy on here. So we've got these stems here with leaves either side that are all done in Lazy Daisy. You've got a flower here and one on the other side as well. These ones here I've done in Lazy Daisy, and the line in the middle of each petal is just for you to do an extra straight stitch in there. Likewise up here, these are quite big petals. You can do them in Lazy Daisy, and then you can add another stitch of a different colour if you like in the middle there. So if you're stitching these, what I would do is I would stitch the stem first in, say, a back stitch or a stem stitch. So you can stitch the stem first and then add your Lazy Daisy stitches on afterwards. I am going to do this one here because this is nice and straightforward. So we've got 5 Lazy Daisy stitches, and we're going to come up in the middle, and we're going to go back down. You can go back down through the same hole, but just make sure that you don't catch the thread on the other side. So you're going to go back down the same hole, but don't pull it all the way through because you want a loop to form. Try to make sure that the loop doesn't get twisted. And then I'm just going to come up at the top of this top petal. So just bring the needle up at the top of the petal. And then you're going to pass your needle through that loop and pull, but don't pull too tight. Now if you pull tightly, you will end up with a long skinny looking petal, and you don't want that. So just pull gently until that loop forms, and then pass the needle back down over the top of the loop to secure it. So there's your first petal, and then you're going to come back down again to the centre. And we're going to go back down the same hole. I'm going to keep my finger in that loop to stop it from twisting. Oops, just dropped it there. Keep the finger in the loop to stop it from twisting. Come up at the top of the next petal. Pass the needle through the loop. Pull gently. And then secure with another little stitch at the top. And let's do the remaining stitches in this flower. So up to in the centre, back down, keep your finger in that loop to stop it from twisting, up at the top of a petal into the loop, pull gently, and a little stitch to secure it. Two more. Up in the centre, back down, keep your finger in the loop to stop it from twisting, up at the top of the petal, pull it gently, and then a little stitch to secure. And of course you can still see the stick and stitch design underneath, but that will all disappear. Up in the centre, back down, up at the top of the petal, and I just pulled that one a little bit too tightly, so I've just pulled it back out a little bit, and then a little bit stitch to secure. That one's gone a bit wonky, don't know what's happened with that one, but you get the idea. And what you can do is, and I actually haven't done that on this, I don't think I've done this anywhere, but if you wanted to, you could put a French knot in the middle of these Lazy Daisy flowers in a contrasting colour, just to finish that off. So that's your Lazy Daisy. Just snip that away. Now I'm going to show you, let's take another colour. I'm going to show you the leaf stitch, and then we will, I'm just going to have a time check. Oh, 5 to 8. How time flies. I'll show you the leaf stitch. Let's use this colour. I didn't decide what colour name this was, but it's very pretty pinky salmony sort of colour. So leaf stitch, I'm just going to split the thread, no particular reason, I'm just going to go with 3 strands for this one. So if any questions, obviously if you're watching this on catch up and you've got any questions, then I won't be there live to answer them, but if you've got any questions and you are on the live, just pop them in the comments below. Okay, a couple of knots in the end. Somebody was asking about my leggings. They're from Llama Leisure, and they're very, very comfortable. They're not very supportive, that's the only thing. But they've got masses of different styles and patterns, and they're nice and colourful. So Llama Leisure, that's where the leggings came from. Right, leaf stitch. So I'm going to show you how to do a really simple leaf stitch on this leaf down here in the corner. So we're going to come up at the top of the leaf and bring the needle down one sort of generous stitch length, if you like. So I'm not measuring anything, but it looks like it's about 1/3 of the length of the leaf without the stem on it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to work from side to side. So I'm going to go to the left hand side first of all, and I'm going to, whoops, just come up at the left, and I'm going to put my needle back down underneath that first stitch, so it's coming back down into the center line but underneath the first stitch that I made. And then I'm going to switch over to the right hand side and to come up on the right, and I'm going to bring my needle down to the center line underneath the stitch that I just made on the left. And then I'm going to go back to the left, and I'm going to come down to the center line underneath the last stitch. So you're just going to keep alternating from side to side. Now there is another way to do this. As always, there's multiple ways. So you could take your needle up and you could actually bring it down to the other side of the center line so that the threads are actually crossing over each other each time. But I think it's just as nice and it's easy just to bring your needle back down on the center line, right underneath your last stitch. And it might feel like nothing's happening and it's taking a little while to grow, but stick with it because the end result is really pretty. So you're going side to side, back to the center line each time, following the outline of the leaf and making sure that you're just bringing your needle down right underneath the last stitch you made. And this is called leaf stitch. Kind of easy to work out why. I guess it's just another form of a straight stitch. It's very effective. This would be a nice example of when it would be a nice thing to do to actually mix up your colours. So you could take, because you've got so many different shades of green in the pack, you could mix up 2 different shades of green here. You just get a bit of variety. It's really satisfying. It's quite thread heavy, so if you can bear to work with a slightly longer length of thread, then do so. Now I'm going quite quickly and it's a bit gappy on that right hand side there, so if that happens to you and you feel like it's a little bit gappy, all you need to do is just to go back to where you spot a gap and just do another stitch. Just fill that space in with another stitch. There you go. And then carry on as normal. So while I'm finishing off this leaf stitch, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the best way to remove the stick and stitch. So the first thing, which it sounds really obvious, but actually it needs to be noted. Make sure you have completely finished your design. So once your design hits that water, the stick and stitch will start dissolving straight away and there's no getting it back. So do make sure that your design is completely finished. And then what you're going to do is I found the best way is to fill a basin of water, but you could also just hold your work under a running tap. However, if you fill a basin of water, you can actually submerge your work in there and just leave it in there. Just leave it for a little while. I was always, when I first started using it, I was quite impatient to see what the results were, and it was all really magical and watching it disappearing. Very impatient for all of that to happen. But really the best thing to do is to leave your design in the water. I would even suggest leaving it in there for about an hour. And the reason for that is not to do with what I was saying at the start about the ink, but that certainly would help if you have printed it out on an inkjet printer. It's more to do with making sure all of the stick and stitch has dissolved, because you're going to find that there's bits that are underneath the thread that might have print on them that you just want, you want to make sure that it's all disappeared. And also bear in mind that stick and stitch has it's got a gluey background, and you want to make sure that all of that glue has gone, because if it hasn't and then your work dries, it'll dry slightly crispy, which isn't great. So make sure that you leave your work submerged for long enough and that you really give it a good rinse. And now I've just come down to the bottom of this leaf and there's a bit of stem going on here, so I'm just going to do a back stitch on the stem. So I'm just going to make one stitch length, and then I'm going to come up stitch length away and go back down into the hole from the previous stitch, and then come up another stitch length away and go back down. There we go. So I know that's kind of difficult to see, but that doing the leaf stitch where you're working from different angles, and because of the sheen on the thread, it really adds a lovely dimension, and it just, you know, it mimics the vein down the centre of the leaf there, and I just think it looks really lovely. Now if you want to, and I haven't done it on my example, but if you wanted to, you could outline the leaf after you've done it with a small back stitch as well, and that would just fill it in and neaten all of those edges. Or you can just leave it as it is, but that's the leaf stitch. So I am just going to check the comments. So Yvonne says, is it cold water or warm water? Do you know what? I don't think it makes any difference, because it's just the action of it's just the water basically that dissolves the fabric. But I definitely wouldn't use hot water. Stay away from hot water in case it does anything nasty to the dyes in the thread. But warm, tepid, cold water, any of those is fine. Yeah, just please don't use hot water. I've not tried it myself, but I'm not going to risk it. So we've done split stitch, we've done a woven rose, we've done some French knots with a very untidy one there to show you what not to do. We've done lazy daisy. I'll do a little bit of satin stitch, and then I think that's maybe us. Unless there's anything that you think I've missed that you would like me to cover, I'm very happy just to, you know, any other stitches that you want me to show you. So let's do satin stitch. This is quite a nice colour as well. Let's look at the mess of it, honestly. Okay. Now, satin stitch is definitely one that's better done with fewer threads. It's, you know, it might be tempting to use a thicker, you know, use all 6 strands, for example, just to get that area filled quickly, but you won't get as nice a result. It won't be as fine looking. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a couple of thread colours here. So I've got 2 in that sort of lime colour, and I'm going to go a bit rogue and take a strand of orange. And then you'll be able to see how that looks when you mix the colours. So literally just take your strands of thread and just hold them together and smooth them out. Helps if they're all the same length, so if you need to sort of trim those, just go ahead and do that, but just make sure that they're all nice and smooth. Tie your knot as usual. Oh, Amanda, that's so nice to see. I hope that you enjoy it, and you know, everybody's here in the group to help, and I'm here in the group to help as well. But honestly, none of the stitches in this design are difficult. None of them are really tricky, and I think that you know, even if you're a complete beginner and you've never stitched before, you will get a nice result from this, and just take your time and just enjoy it. Look at that, that's like lime and tangerine tic tacs, yeah. Oh, nice. Okay, I'm going to do satin stitch, and I am going to, let's see, yeah, I'm going to just do a couple of these little kind of leaves here. Now, these leaves sit above this rose, but if I had carried on with the rose, I probably would have done enough so that the leaves were actually touching it. So the leaves appear to be coming out from behind that rose, but at the minute they look a bit gappy. But yeah, when you do your rose, you can make it bigger. So with your satin stitch, you're basically doing a straight stitch to fill in an area, and it's that simple. So I'm starting at the top of one of those points and I'm coming straight down to the bottom. Now if you're filling in a larger area, what you could do, and there actually, in this example, there aren't really any areas that I would do this, apart from perhaps the oak leaves. So what you would do with the oak leaves is you would section off your leaf on both sides with some parallel lines, so that you're then filling in each side equally, and it keeps your lines nice and straight. With these little ones, you don't need to do that. So we're just starting in the middle, I'm going straight down to the bottom, and then I'm going to just work from both sides, just going up to the top and back down to the bottom, and then on the other side I'm just following the curve back down to the bottom, and I've caught the tail of thread again. You can just, I don't know if you can see a little tuft there, I'll sort that afterwards. There. I'm coming up at the top, down at the bottom, and they're more or less in straight lines, but if you need to kind of angle them in a little bit to fill a shape, that's fine as well. So the half flowers on the edges of the pumpkin, so this one here, and there's another one on the other side, what I've done is I've drawn some lines on the petals and in the centre to help you, because you can either just stitch with straight lines all the way along, or you can angle them slightly, and again that's up to you. Forgot which side I was working on there. And back down, and then little stitch to finish off there. And then I'll just do this next one as well, just to show you. And yes, you've got the pattern to follow, and you can absolutely try and, you know, get all of your stitches right on the lines of the pattern, but just bear in mind all the time that once you've finished, that pattern will be gone. So if you're not on the line, it doesn't matter. It's not like colouring in, you know, to try and stay inside the lines or on the lines with embroidery. You don't need to do that. You do want to try with these satin stitches and with the leaf stitch, you want to try and have your edges nice and smooth. But if you find, especially as a beginner, that they're a little bit uneven, that's when it can help if you want to just sort of outline your petals or your leaves with a back stitch. Oh, I'm quite liking the mixture of the orange and the green on these leaves. It just adds a little bit more dimension. And I think one more on this side. And then last one. Yeah, I think that's looking quite nice there. So I think, unless I've missed anything, and of course, you know, always comment in the group if you want me to demonstrate another stitch, because I can easily just record a little video and post that in the group. But I think I think we've covered actually most of the stitches that you need for this design. These dried grasses here, that's French knots on the end there. this little set of leaves in the middle, I've done a back stitch down the centre and then satin stitch on the leaves either side. As I say, there's quite a lot of lazy daisies going on, and even things like these little, they're a bit like Chinese lanterns, aren't they? That's satin stitch. And what I would do for these really small areas, if you're filling them with satin stitch, just use a single thread, at most a double thread, and then you'll get a really nice fine result. The tops of the acorns are French knots, and then satin stitch for the acorn itself. And yeah, I think that's it.